Why is groove your move so important? Why do you want to start with grooving your move before you get to the nuts and bolts of the sweet spot shots? Because if you've ever experienced hitting balls at the range and feeling like you're doing well and then going to the course and not being able to execute the way you did on the range, you need groove your move. What exactly is groove your move? Groove your move is some key learning fundamentals that can help you to pattern the things that you want to learn in your swing and you want to improve in your swing much more quickly and much more easily, but it's also going to help you take those new patterns from the range to the course. Now, the first key as far as groove your move goes is the 80% rule. And the 80% rule is pretty simple. What it says is that if you're not doing 80% of your repetitions correctly, you're not actually improving. So if half of your repetitions are good and half are bad, you're not getting any better. We would like to make sure that we're getting at least 80% of the repetitions correct every time we're trying to train something new. Now, this actually comes from a learning theory that says if you want to change a pattern permanently, you have to do 60 correct repetitions per day for 21 straight days. Now, usually when I say that to my students, they get this big old eye bugging out thing like you see in a Looney Tunes cartoon. So my job as a teacher is to try to create shortcuts for my students. And the shortcut that I found here is it's much more important to get quality and consistency in your repetitions than it is to get volume in your repetitions. And what that means is 5 or 10 a day that are done perfectly and you're obeying the 80% rule is much better than doing 100 a day 2 or 3 times per week when you're only getting 50 or 60% correct. Now, you have 2 important keys to help you obey the 80% rule. Number 1 is visualizations. When you visualize something, if you do it very, very precisely, your body doesn't know the difference between visualizing and actually performing. So you can do correct visualizations on a daily basis, and it doesn't take much time, and it doesn't take much energy, and it yields some really big benefits. The other piece of the puzzle is discipline. It's very, very easy when we're at the range hitting balls to say, oh no, I'm just going to hit a couple more. I can work it out. I can figure it out. Well, the reality is if you're trying to work it out and you're trying to figure it out and you're getting incorrect repetitions, you are sitting on the fence. You're not improving. So make sure that you discipline yourself to follow the 80% rule all the time when you're trying to improve your game. There are 2 other tools that you can use to help you obey the 80% rule in all your practice in addition to visualizations and discipline. One is progressions. The second is the opposite fix. Think of progressions like going to school. You don't go from first grade to college without some steps in between. Same thing is true with your golf game. You don't go from where you are to where you want to get to without taking a few steps in between. Well, those steps are progressions, and there's 3 basic progressions that you can use: the speed progression, the size progression, and the club progression. The speed progression means you need to change speeds in order to groove a new habit. If you've been swinging at a particular speed on the range, on the course, your body is used to performing certain movements at that speed. So if you're trying to get new movements grooved, you need to change the speed. And the best way to do it is to go a little slower. Now, we're not talking Tai Chi slow, maybe 5 or 10% slower, but just a little bit slower makes it easier to perform using a new habit, and it also makes it easier to monitor whether you're doing it right or wrong. Size is the second progression you can use, and the same thing is true here. If you're used to making full swings with a certain movement and you want to change that movement, you need to reduce the size a little bit to make it easier to change the movement. Maybe go from a full swing to a 3/4 swing, or a full swing to a half a swing, and as you can obey the 80% rule, then you gradually work your way back up. The same thing also holds true for clubs. Don't try to make a change with your most difficult club, which for most of us is the driver. Use an easy club first and then work your way back up. There's a really important phrase to remember when it comes to progressions: reduce to produce. And what that means is if you want to produce 80% correct repetitions, you need to reduce the size, reduce the speed, or reduce the club or the difficulty of the club in order to make sure you're following the 80% rule. If you have a particularly difficult pattern that you want to change, an old habit that just doesn't want to go away, the opposite fix is the tool that you want to use. Let me tell you a little story to give you the theory behind the opposite fix. They did a study a few years ago with two groups of golfers. The goal was to hit a 100-yard wedge shot. They took one group of golfers, and for 3 weeks all they did was practice 100-yard wedge shots. They took another group of golfers, and all they practiced was 75 and 125-yard wedge shots. After the 3 weeks, they had the two groups come together and they did a performance test. The group that had hit 75 and 125-yard wedge shots actually performed 30% better than the other group, even though they hadn't hit any 100-yard wedge shots. The idea is that if you practice both ends of the spectrum, both sides of the fence, it's much easier to find the middle. So if you've been slicing, learning to hook is the easiest way to hit it straight. If you've been scooping, learning to trap it is the easiest way to make good contact. Using the opposite fix is a great way to fix those really pesky old habits that just don't want to change.